The abandoned place we explore today takes us to southwestern Scotland and the ancient region of Galloway. This abandoned mansion's history was originally that of a castle built in the 1400s that is closely associated with the famous Clan Kennedy of Scotland, whose motto is "Avise la fin," or "Consider the end." In hindsight, these words now seem ironic. While we all know of the famous death of President Kennedy, there is in fact a lesser-known, earlier tale of the Kennedys. It was this castle's story that would soon come to involve a bloody family feud and turn it into an abandoned mansion of the first Kennedy assassination. The ornate gates of the house are the first thing that greets us. They are overgrown, and peeking from the top is the face of a green man, which seems very appropriate. Ahead of us looms the castle, now an overgrown ruin. But what's an abandoned place without its story? The Kennedy clan appear in records living in northern Galloway around 1010 in the reign of Malcolm II. At this time they were leaders of Clan Montercasduff, meaning the black-footed race. Many people believe that centuries before, they were once part of the ancient Celtic Wodedeeni tribe, led by King Cunetha, who were sent west by High King Vortigern to settle on that coast to fight off Pictish and Irish raiders. Cunetha was originally Kennedy, meaning ugly-headed or grim-headed. DNA tests have shown the Kennedys are surprisingly not related to the Irish Kennedys, but were later mixed with half-Irish Gaelic-speaking Vikings in intermarriages as these people came into the area. In 1235, the once independent kingdom of Galloway was broken into 3 provinces when King Alexander II of Scotland defeated its King Gilroy. The Kennedys had been stewards of the northern part called Lesser Galloway and later Carrick and Ayr. Since the Scottish takeover, they served under the Cummins, the Earls of Carrick, whose famous member John Cummin III was murdered by Robert the Bruce. By the late 1200s, John Kennedy had become owner of Dunure Castle, and this served as the Kennedy clan's first family seat. John later married the Lord of Carrick's daughter, and he inherited the lordship of Carrick in 1306. In the 1300s, he also acquired lands that would in time become the earldom of Castles in the 1500s. John had a son, Gilbert Kennedy, who inherited the title in 1384. Gilbert, then Laird of Dunure, took into his care in 1404 Mary, the daughter of King Robert III. Mary had been wed to George Douglas, the first Earl of Angus, who had died of the plague in 1403 while being held prisoner after the Battle of Homildon Hill. Laird Gilbert had 9 sons from 2 different wives. Among them was his oldest son Gilbert, heir to Dunure, and his sons Hugh the Friar, who would become Laird of Ardstinker, Thomas, who would become Laird of Bargany, John, who would become Laird of Blairkin, and his younger son James, who fell in love with the king's daughter they were caring for and got her pregnant. The king was highly offended by James' act, but allowed him to marry her. This caused Laird Gilbert to then dispossess his oldest son Gilbert and make James heir as Lord Dunure. Mary gave James 2 sons, a Gilbert who would become the first Lord Kennedy, and James the Bishop of St. Andrews, who later ruled Scotland as regent during the early years of James III. In a tragic twist in 1408, when his father Gilbert died, James, Lord Dunure, was murdered by his older half-brother Gilbert in an argument over the succession, and Gilbert fled the country. After James's murder, his son Gilbert Kennedy of Dunure became First Lord Kennedy. He served as Constable of Stirling Castle and alongside his brother the Bishop as one of the 6 regents of James III. In 1455, Gilbert gained the lands of the castle we explore today, which were previously owned by a nearby abbey, which was founded in the 1200s by Edward Bruce, brother of King Robert the Bruce. Records seem to point to Gilbert then building the castle we explore today as his new family seat. The earliest description of the building is a large square tower house that was at least 3 stories tall, with a vaulted basement and an attic surrounded by a moat and walls. On Gilbert's death in 1489, his son John Kennedy became second Lord Kennedy before dying in 1508. John's sons were the half-brothers Alexander and David. Alexander was given the lands of our castle in 1481 and became first Laird of Girvanmains. His other son, Sir David Kennedy, would be named first Earl of Castles by James IV and later died fighting at the Battle of Flodden. Deadly conflict would erupt in the following centuries between these two branches of the Kennedy line. In 1461, Alexander Kennedy married and had a son Hugh, who would become second Laird of Girvanmains. Hugh died in 1565, and his son Gilbert succeeded him as the third Laird. Gilbert married Margaret Kennedy, daughter of David Kennedy, the Laird of Culzean. He had a son Hugh, who would later be the fourth Laird when Gilbert died in 1592. In these early years of his reign, Hugh, the fourth Laird of the castle, was a vassal of the Laird of Bargany. Due to his position, he would become embroiled in a family feud that would nearly wreck and even destroy many of the branches of the Kennedy Lairds descended from their shared ancestor, Gilbert, the Laird of Dunmuir's 9 sons. At this time, in fact, most noble families of the area were Kennedys, and a rhyme of the day even says, "Twixt Wigtown and the town of Ayr, and low down by the Crooves of Cree, ye shall not get a lodging there, except ye court a Kennedy." The brutal inter-Kennedy fighting broke out at the end of the 1500s between the senior branches of the Kennedys, led by Gilbert, the 4th Earl of Castles, and his uncle and ally, Sir Thomas Kennedy, Lord of Culzean, against the lesser Kennedy branch lairds, led by Thomas, Laird of Bargany. On Bargany's side were many Kennedy lairds, including Blairkin, our man Hugh, the Laird of Girvanmains, and the Lairds of Benane and Knockdaw. As allies, they also counted the Muir clan lairds Auchendrane and Cloncaird, and the Stewart clan lairds Ochiltree and Dunduff, and the Cathcart clan's Laird Carleton. The 4th Earl of Castles and his uncle Culzean fought on the side of Mary Queen of Scots at the Battle of Langside, where the Queen lost, and the Laird of Bargany had fought against him on the other side with James, Earl of Moray, and the boy king James VI. The Earl saw Bargany as a problem, as they had been enemies and he could assemble large armies at his castles in Ardstinker and Bargany that laid on the only routes between the two parts of the Earl's own lands. According to historians, Earl Gilbert of Castles was nicknamed the King of Carrick, and was a very greedy man and cared not for how he got land. Earl Gilbert desired the Abbey of Glenluce, and entered into transactions with the abbot to hold the abbey itself, but was stopped when the abbot died. The Earl instead went to a monk in the abbey and asked him to forge the abbot's handwriting on a deed and the signatures of the nuns of the convent. The plan worked, but he feared the monk would reveal the forgeries, and he hired a peasant to stab him to death. Once that was done, he began to fear the peasant would reveal the crime, and he arranged to accuse him of theft and had him hanged. In 1565, with the help of Thomas, Laird Bargany, he convinced Alan Stewart, who held Crossraguel Abbey, to meet him at his castle with Thomas, Laird of Culzean, and then go to the abbey to discuss gaining rights over the abbey's lands. Instead, he seized Alan and imprisoned him at Dunmuir Castle. He then dragged him to a supposed feast, which was actually the Black Vault, a secret chamber with an iron grill and roaring fire. After refusing to give over the lands and cursing the Earl, he was tied to it, and the Earl's cooks prepared the banquet by burning different parts of his body over hours. This was repeated for days, with his legs being roasted over the fire until he was unable to use them. Soon after, he signed the papers the Earl had drawn up to give away the abbey. Alan was, however, rescued by his brother-in-law, Thomas, the Laird of Bargany, who, tipped off by a young servant named William Dalrymple, realized what had happened. He sent papers to the crown for Alan's release and made a daring raid, capturing Dunmuir Castle and freeing the prisoner. There was a standoff there, with Bargany summoning his soldiers, and a fight in the dungeon, with Castles eventually allowing them to leave. A peace was brokered that let Alan free but left the abbey lands to the Earl. This rescue started a feud between the Earl of Castles and the Lairds of Bargany that would continue to grow and soon engulf Hugh of our castle and his own lands. The Earl of Castles, luckily for many, died in 1576 after falling from his horse. He was succeeded by his son John Kennedy, 5th Earl, who continued the feud and sadly had many of the worst traits of his father. After a number of slights involving Bargani's conflicts with lords under the Earl, he devised a plan to support the Lord of Kilhensey in a dispute with Bargani's sister over property. Castle's planned to use Italian explosives to destroy Bargani's gate at Ardstinger Castle and then slay the entire Bargani family. Thomas, the Laird of Culzean, who was the Earl's uncle and tutor, instead wanted them to kill Bargani's sons while they were out hunting, as he would die of grief. Fortunately, the plan was revealed by accident, and Bargani demanded a response from Culzean, who denied everything. Shortly after, in 1597, Thomas, Laird Bargani, died. Many had considered him the opposite of the Earl, as he was seen as wise, generous, kind, and noble. He was succeeded by his son Gilbert Kennedy of Bargani, who had been married to a maid of Queen Anne of Denmark by King James VI as an act of punishment. Following the rise of Gilbert as Laird Bargani, he allied with the Lairds of Auchendrane and Dunduff against Sir Thomas, Laird of Culzean, the close ally of the Earl. A conflict had been ongoing between them based around widow Black Bessie Kennedy, who lived at Brunston Castle. Bessie had entered into a legal dispute with the Earl of Castles over her husband's will and the castle's lands. Bessie went to the Laird of Bargani and gave him the rights to the lands for his help. However, she lost the case and the lands, and Bargani was further charged back due taxes on them. The king then forced Bargani to pay the fine to John, Earl of Castles. After this, Bargani asked to be left Brunston Castle in her will in exchange for her living on his lands at Newark. She accepted but was persuaded by Sir Thomas of Culzean to make the will out to him instead, giving him the castle and the back-owed taxes Bargani had collected. Culzean then purposefully didn't use the decree, instead hanging it over Bargani's head to antagonize him. Bargani wrote a furious letter to Culzean. Sir, I see now, having considered what you have done at length, that ye have proved ungrateful to every courtesy I have shown you, and as you know, I have made you the man that you are, and there is nothing that you have dared or done without my support and sustenance, and you repay me like this. I vow that I shall very soon do to you as you did to me. Culzean responded with his own letter. Sir, I have received your bullying letter, and in answer I say that I have done as much for you as you ever did for me. As for your filthy slander, I care not, but I vow that you will not be able to carry out your foul intention towards me. I think you caught a venereal disease on the bridge of your nose last time you tried. Bargani was livid at the letter, as he'd been recently hit on the nose by a golf ball in an accident. Both enraged parties were held back by relatives and the Earl of Castles, who remained neutral. However, soon Bargani and two local lords decided to try to murder Culzean, and that year, the Lairds Dunduff and Auchendrane caught him leaving a house and fired pistols at him, but he escaped. Dunduff was exiled and Auchendrane had his house attacked and seized by Culzean. After this, in January 1598, Thomas, Laird Culzean, shot pistols at Gilbert, Laird of Bargani's servants, and pursued them on horse the next day. Meanwhile, Andrew MacAlexander, Laird of Drumacreen, had a lease on the lands of his estate from Hugh, the Laird of Girvanmains, the castle that we explore today. Hugh, in turn, was vassal of the lands under John, the 5th Earl of Castles. But Drumacreen was a proud man, and in 1599 he decided he would now be under the Earl directly, and approached him to pay him his taxes instead of to Hugh. Hugh soon learned of this and came to the Earl of Castles and said his lordship had done him wrong in the setting of his lands over his head, and the only gains he shall reap by that deed shall be but small. Castles answered angrily, "You dare not take issue with the man, for we know where you dwell." Hugh replied, Drumacreen should repent of the deed, and he could do what he liked to him. The Earl responded, "You dare not trouble him, for fear of losing your head," and he told Hugh to get back to his own castle's gate. Hugh rode away, and thinking that the Laird of Drumacreen would soon come after him, he stayed with his two servants on a moor behind a small hill. He then saw Drumacreen coming with his brother, the Laird of Corseclays, and a Kennedy. Neither acted in his defense when Lord Hugh's two men came to them on horseback and struck Lord Drumacreen on the head with swords and killed him. Learning of the murder, the Earl of Castles was very offended at the deed and denounced Hugh as a rebel and swore to do all that he could to have his life and wreck him. However, the Earl had also offended many other lairds in Galloway, who in 1601 besieged him at Kennedy Castle. The Earl called for Laird Bargani's help, offering to settle their dispute in return. Bargani came and negotiated the lords leaving, but the Earl fell back on his promise. Shortly after this, the Earl also fell out with the Laird of Blairkin, and the Earl visited him to reconcile matters. On the second day, a messenger came from Laird Culzean, who said there was a plot to murder the Earl as he slept. The Earl fled, and Blairkin was enraged. He then met with Hugh of Girvanmains and the Lords Ochiltree, Bargany, and others, who all agreed to work and die together as allies against the Earl. The Earl soon learned of this and became terrified. At this time, Auchendrane, who had tried to murder Lord Culhane, renewed their peace by having his son marry Culhane's daughter. Along with this, Culhane released Bargany from his Black Bessie debts and reconciled with Dunduff, who had been in exile. The feud between the Earl and Bargany and his allies continued onwards, however, and only intensified. The next incident was with Hugh, the Laird of Girvanmains in our castle, who at the time held lands as a vassal under Laird Bargany and paid taxes to him. The Earl issued a decree to repossess the lands of Hugh for himself and made to collect the taxes of grain with his soldiers. Bargany and Girvanmains sent their men to stop him and move the grain to Ardstigger Castle. The Earl then sent a large force of men who were surrounded by the opposing lord's soldiers. A standoff between the two groups of 1,000 men led to a truce and a decree that Hugh would keep his grain and lands, but in the future give the grain to the Earl. Bargany then decided that it would be best to kill the Earl himself and made a secret deal with Culhane, who agreed to stay out of the way of the plot. The Earl had to travel to Galloway, so Bargany gathered men to attack him, but soon found Culhane in fact had gone with him on the trip. Bargany sent Lord Auchendrane to speak to Culhane, who then had him imprisoned, claiming he was there to murder him. Auchendrane escaped on a rowboat and went to Bargany, who wrote to Castles, demanding a response. The Earl then blamed Auchendrane for inventing it all. After this, the Earl issued a decree seizing the lands of Laird Blairkin. Bargany's allies decided Culhane had tipped off the Earl about the attempt on his life, so Blairkin went with Bargany to ambush and kill Culhane as he traveled. However, Lord Auchendrane had tipped Culhane off, and instead he sent a servant boy who was captured. Culhane wrote to the king, who ordered them all to appear before him. In court, Auchendrane sided with Bargany, and they were all cleared and made to drink wine together. After this, Castles went to Galloway, and Bargany made a new agreement with his allies to take the Earl's life. Some of Bargany's men laid in wait in an abandoned house to shoot at him as he traveled. But locals warned him, and he took a different path. The Earl then decided to strike back against the lords directly. On the 6th of December 1601, Gilbert, the Laird of Bargany, went to Ayr on business to meet with Lords Auchendrane, Carleton, and Cloncaird. He passed within a quarter of a mile of Cassell's castle, but did not stop to pay him respects, which the Earl interpreted as a great insult. The Earl then gathered all his men at Maybole Castle while watching the lords with his spies for a week. Bargany was informed of being in danger, but felt his 80 men would keep him safe, and he set out against the advice on December 11th during a snowstorm. They were soon spotted by the Earl's scouts before reaching Brigadoon Bridge, where they gathered and split into two groups of 40. In Bargany's group was Laird Auchendrane, Benane, Cloncaird, and Hugh of Girvanmains. The other group was led by Lord Carleton. Soon Bargany's group ran into the Earl's party of 220 men, and after shouting at each other, Bargany said he did not mean to fight and rode along a bog, which the Earl rode along the other side of, and after meeting them, began to shoot at Bargany's men. Bargany and his horsemen moved to defend them and tried to cross the stream. Most did not make it across except Bargany and 4 men, who were shot at and charged by the Earl's 30 horsemen. Bargany demanded to fight the Earl himself, but a horseman then threw a spear that went through his head and throat, and a sword hit him in the face. He rode back to his men and fell from his horse. Auchendrane was shot in the leg. Bargany's men fled and pulled the spear from the laird's throat, carrying him off to a barn. The Earl came and left him alive, as he would be executed if he lived, as the Earl was a local judge and had opened a case against him. While injured, Bargany appealed to the king to set Auchendrane free, and he was let go. After a week, Bargany died at the age of just 25, and Castles, with the help of bribes and Culhane, was found not guilty of his death by the crown. At Bargany's death, the family was bankrupted, and his child son took over what little was left. Lady Bargany, furious at Culhane for his negative influences on the Earl as his tutor, mentor, and ally, conspired with Lord Cloncaird and Bargany's brother Thomas to kill him. They lay in wait for Culhane, but were seen. Laird Auchendrane was sent by the lords to negotiate a truce, and they met at a house where Culhane refused to sign the papers unless the Earl knew. Lady Bargany discovered the attempted truce, and furious, had them lay another ambush, which was spoiled by the Lord Auchendrane tipping Culhane off. In May 1602, Culhane arranged to make a trip to meet another lord on the way to Edinburgh. This lord tipped off Cloncaird, who summoned Bargani's brother Thomas and a few others to murder Culzean. They waited for him outside of Greenan Castle, where he stayed the night, and then ambushed him on the road, shooting him many times as he fled, killing him and taking his valuables. The Lady Bargani, hating Lord Auchendrane for his past untrustworthiness, claimed he was involved in the plot, but he was exonerated at court. However, the Earl of Castles then paid his brother Hugh a huge sum to assassinate him, and he came with horsemen, but Auchendrane escaped. They then tried to ambush him at a meeting, but he was warned, so they attacked his castle, but were fought off. Around this time, Thomas and the Lord Cloncaird learned of the Lady of Castles traveling back north to Carrick, and they ambushed her and burned the house she hid inside of with her men, and John Dick, who was the man who had earlier killed Bargani with a spear. The attackers agreed to let them all go if they could have Dick, who then escaped in the night. The rest, except Lady Castles, were taken prisoner. She then complained to King James I in London, who was enraged and proclaimed them all rebels. Soon after, the Earl avoided another ambush and later met a relative, Thomas Dalrymple, on the road. The Earl took him prisoner and in the morning hung him from a tree for no crime other than being a closer relation to Bargani. Bargani's brother Thomas then fled to France and later to Ireland, where he lived with the Viscount of Ards, dying penniless. The bankrupted family's castle was demolished shortly after this. The Laird of Cloncaird was left in Scotland by Thomas and chased as a rebel, later dying of depression at his abandonment. Lord Auchendrane then seized Cloncaird's castle that had been forfeited to the Earl. The Earl was furious and claimed Auchendrane was involved in the murder of Culzean, causing him to be jailed again for 6 months. Lady Bargani, still not done with Auchendrane herself, pressed for his lands to be forfeited in court, but before this could play out, she died of tuberculosis in 1605. A large funeral was held, and her body placed with Gilbert's in a grand new tomb. Lord Blairkin, Ochiltree, Kennedy of Kirkhill, Auchendrane, and others all attended with a banner of revenge that had a picture of the Laird of Bargani with his bloody wounds. After the funeral, Lord Auchendrane was involved in a fight with one of the killers of Bargani, which angered the Earl of Castles. In 1608, the Earl accused Auchendrane in court of having murdered a man named William Dalrymple, who was a messenger who had gone missing years ago after his master Thomas of Culzean was murdered. Auchendrane and his son were arrested and tortured by being put in the boot, a device used to crush the foot and leg. They would not admit guilt, and the king kept them imprisoned while a witness was found under threat who would give evidence against them. The witness claimed they had lured Dalrymple to meet them as he had seen the murderers of Culzean. Auchendrane's son eventually admitted to them killing him and burying him on a beach. Auchendrane and his son were then executed in 1611. As for the fate of the Earl John of Castles, he was imprisoned twice in 1604 for abuse of his wife Jean Fleming, the rich widow of the Lord Chancellor of Scotland. The first incident involved him dragging her from court by her hair before witnesses, after which King James I of England moved to protect her financial interests from him. Jean died in 1609, leaving him no heir, and the Earl died soon after at the age of just 40 in 1615, only 4 years after the last of his enemies. The earldom then passed to his nephew, a wiser and kinder man. With the Earl's death, the long family feud ended, and somehow Hugh the Laird of Girvanmains escaped destruction and lived to a great age, dying in 1639. This may have been due to the fact that he was not one of the killers of Culzean, and his immediate liege, Lord Bargani, was also dead. This put him directly under the Earl, who despite swearing to ruin him years before, might simply have run out of time for revenge. In the 1800s, the bloody feud would be immortalized by Sir Walter Scott in his play, An Ayrshire Tragedy. Today, the houses of the Kennedys involved in the conflict reflect their owners' fortunes. Those of the Earl and his allies still stand, with Culzean House on the Scottish £5 note and Castles House now fully restored. Dunure, Kennedy, Carlton, Kirkhill, and Ardstinker castles all lie in ruins, and Bargani and Ochiltree castles have been demolished. Despite surviving the feud, Hugh of Girvanmains' castle mansion now too lies abandoned and silent, surrounded by the encroaching woods. Let's take a look inside at what is left. As we head to the castle, we approach from the side of the river, which would have been attached to the moat surrounding the castle. From this vantage point, you can see the mound it was built on, which would have been surrounded by walls. The original plan was a 3-story rectangle with a circular tower at one end that you can still see from this side. Its walls were around 5 or 6 feet thick, which point more to its use as a fortified house than a castle. There are some large wall cracks as well as a square buttress to hold the weight of the castle's masonry. Around the side are entrances that would have once led to the walled courtyard.
Yeah.
Through what would have been a door above us is the first floor of the castle, which was a great hall, and above it the second floor was divided in two, with a private room attached to the large round tower on the castle's side. Looking up this square tower, the remains of stairs that led up to each story still hang above us. This vaulted basement once may have held food as a cold storage.
It's just a room. One room filled with rubble. Yeah, I went up there.
The old fireplace chimney leads straight up to the sky. This second basement area attaches to the circular side tower and appears to be the main chamber on its floor.
It's a tower.
By now, you may have noticed some features of the house that extend well beyond the early square castle with a tower, and that are mostly collapsed. While the mansion was to fall out of use and become ruined, Hugh was not its last owner. When he died in 1639, his son James took over, dying possibly around 1660. His close relative, Sir John Kennedy, then became owner and rebuilt the mansion between 1677 to 1679. This was a huge undertaking and doubled the size of the castle, creating a more modern mansion. An entire new east wing was added with a round tower at the end, making an L-shaped house, with the old castle part on the southern side. To connect the sections, a square tower was built in the middle, and a second square tower at the far side of the old section, also with a staircase. Additionally, parapets and bartizans were put on top. Outside of the new house, a walled garden was constructed, and lawns along with the ornate gateway you first saw when we entered. Sir John died in 1684, just 5 years after its completion, and his son Gilbert inherited the lands until, in 1694, due to the great debts from the expenses of the new house, he was forced to sell to the Kennedys of Kirkhill. These Kennedys were another branch of the family who had also attended Lady Bargani's funeral decades before. Sir Gilbert died a few years after the sale in 1697. The new lord of the mansion was Sir Thomas Kennedy of Kirkhill, who was Lord Provost of Edinburgh under James II of England. He died in 1715, having 8 sons, of which Thomas Kennedy, the Lord Advocate, inherited the mansion. Thomas was the lawyer for the Crown in Scotland and later became Queen's Advocate, a member of Parliament and Baron of the Exchequer. He died without heirs in 1754, and his brother General James lived at the house until just 1761, when he too died, and his younger brother Francis inherited, dying himself not long after in 1765. It was Francis's son Thomas who inherited, pictured here with the subtle message of a feud not forgotten, a painting of Culain's murder site, Greenan Castle. Thomas married the niece of famous architect Robert Adam and would make a decision to use Adam to build a new family house in 1785, replacing the mansion that was then described by writers as, by very far, the best house in all that country. When the new house was completed, he moved into it, abandoning the old mansion in 1790, and it slowly fell into decay. This thinner rectangular area is the new portion of the mansion that ends in the round tower, which luckily still stands.
How do you get into that part? Like in there and in the tower. Oh. Yeah. No. I'm heading over there. Okay.
High above it, in the tower, are old fireplaces that would have warmed each floor. We head into a small entrance that was once the basement floor door to the second square tower, thinking maybe we could get up to the inside this way. The stairs here are also gone, but oddly the tower is circular inside. The rubble-filled cellar entrance is full of webs, but we decide to head in.
Okay. I'm in this tunnel. I don't know how far it goes. Probably not very, but... Okay, don't go too far. In case it collapses on me.
These arched inset racks would have held the Lord's wines.
Probably just a tree. Oh, well.
In the chamber is a small circular shaft, possibly a tiny well feeding into the nearby river. There's an arrow slit enlarged to fit a musket.
Yeah, there's just a room with a hole in it. Oh no. Okay, good. Yeah, getting through there is real fun. Nope. I know I was under that. I think.
Back around the side, I've discovered a huge crack running up and down the old medieval tower, and a later added cellar entrance below it. It's only a matter of a few years without restoration, and this entire section could fall. It feels like it might any second.
Oh, yeah, I already went in here. I came out one back in already. Too bad. There's got to be a way in there, but it must be just blocked off. I mean, it's just a square.
As we depart this abandoned place, I've saved the best feature for last. You've probably noticed us walk by this crest a few times and wondered what it was. When the house was remodeled in 1679, the Kennedy crest was added to the wall of the new central square tower. Above its door are the Kennedy initials and the motto in Latin, Ut scriptura sonat finis non pugna coronat, or, as scripture shows, the crown awaits the battle's close. Wise words, as our tale of this family isn't finished either. We're about to head over to another location that is in fact the new massive family mansion the Kennedys built and moved into. It lies so close by, you can actually see it over the trees. Join us next time as we explore the story and the interior of this huge and amazing abandoned mansion and a family feud not soon forgotten. If you're already subscribed, please don't forget to hit the bell icon below to be notified of our upcoming explorations. Until next time.